Good morning. It is a beautiful day here in North Carolina, and today we're going to talk about what I do to set up my equipment for wildlife photography. So come along and enjoy this adventure. Hello, native woodpecker. The first thing I want to talk about is how I have my lens set up. So I bought the Sigma 150 to 600 Sport. The reason I bought the Sport is for three reasons. One, it has a bigger aperture on the end of the lens. It is water resistant, and the biggest factor is that I can manually focus using this big focus ring here, and I can do that while it's on a tripod and just use my thumb to do it. That probably is the number one reason why I bought this lens. But it has four settings on the outside of the lens, and the first one is focus. You can have it on manual focus, you can have it automatic focus, or what they call mod. And mod means that I can automatically focus, and if the camera is not focusing on it, I take my finger off the back button focus, and then I can manually adjust where I want it to focus. This is really important when you're taking pictures of birds that are in bushes and trees, and you want to be able to get those focus on that bird, and the camera just will not focus on it. This is a great way to do it. Number two is the distance of focus. So this lens has the option to focus from 2.6 meters to 10 meters, or 10 meters to infinity, or full. Most of the time, if I'm just going out birding, I'm not in a blind or anything like that, I will have this set to full, so it will focus from 2.6 meters to infinity. Now, there's an issue with the Canon R6 that I'm going to talk about later, and why I adjust this. So in certain situations, if I feel the subject's going to be further than 10 meters away from me, I will hit that 10 meters to infinity, and if I feel like the subject's going to be closer than 10 meters, I hit the other switch. The last two is optical stabilization. I have this turned to 2. It has 0, 1, or has off 1 and 2. I use 2. I sent an email actually to the manufacturer, and they did explain to me what optical stabilization does and what 2 and 1 do. I didn't see a great difference between 1 and 2, so I have it switched to 2. And the last one is customization, and there's a device that you can attach to the back of this lens that you can program the lens, do a software update to the lens. You can do things like that to the lens, certain adjustments. If this lens is a little soft at certain distances, you can adjust those focus parameters. But that's the settings I use for my lens. Now I'm going to talk about what settings I use on my camera. First of all, I want to talk about my camera. It's a Canon R6 mirrorless camera. It's a 20 megapixel camera. This has been a very good camera for me. I've been very happy with it. But let me talk about the settings that I use in this camera. First and foremost is the mode. Now, there are generally 4 modes on every camera. There's manual, program, there's aperture priority, and shutter priority. Program is not a great mode to be photographing birds. The camera has way too much control over it. It doesn't know what you see in your mind's eye for the image, and it just takes whatever picture it's programmed for. Manual is way too difficult to try and keep everything straight in your mind while you're trying to take your photos. I have tried it, it's failed miserable. So I strongly encourage people to use either aperture priority or shutter priority. They are probably the best way for you to have your camera take the best pictures that they can. The next thing I want to talk about is my shutter release button here. Now, the only thing this does is release the shutter. It does not focus. I have it shut off inside the camera. I'm going to show you how to do that. So the only thing it does is take pictures. There's a knob right above it, and this is my aperture adjustment knob. And aperture priority, when you turn that knob, you adjust the aperture. In most cases, when I'm taking wildlife photography, the aperture's open all the way. But when I'm taking landscape photography, or if I'm taking pictures of flowers or whatever else, I will definitely adjust the aperture. But for most of the time, bird photography, it's open all the way. The next knob I want to talk about is a knob on top here. So I have my ISO in manual mode, so I manually adjust the ISO. So when I'm looking through the camera, the first thing I do is look at my shutter speed. If my shutter speed is too low, I will increase the ISO by turning the knob. Now when I look through my lens, I can see, or look through my viewfinder, I can see what my ISO is. But if it's too low, I can raise it up. But if it's too high, I can also lower it so that I have a higher quality image, or image with less grain. The next button that I have set up on this camera is the back button focus. That's how I focus the camera. Now, I have to warn you, if you've never used a back button focus before, I can remember when I first started using the back button focus, I hated it, I hated it, I hated it. It took me about a week to get used to it, and I really struggled that entire week. So if you're gonna use the back button focus, don't change your camera the day before you go on a trip of a lifetime. Do it a week or two beforehand, because it can be a little bit to get used to. And the last knob that I have adjusted is for my light meter. So I have a wheel in the back here that's set up for my light meter, and I use this a lot if I'm photographing a subject, a bird. I'm going to show you a picture here of two blue herons that are backlit. To get those birds properly exposed, I advanced the light meter, and what I'll do is, while I'm focusing on the camera, so I have so mostly it's 0, 1/3, 2/3, first stop, and it keeps going like that on this lens here. So what I will do is focus on the subject, take a picture, advance the light meter, take a picture, advance the light meter, take a picture, advance the light meter, take a picture. And if I don't move the camera a lot, if it's pretty stable, I can merge those images so that I have a properly exposed background and a properly exposed subject. By using the light meter, that's how I get those images here. And I think it's important that you do this. You can also go the other way. You can retard the light meter or have less light come into the camera. I don't use that a lot, except for if I'm taking pictures of very bright birds, such as white egrets, white pelicans. Any white birds can be tough like that. But I gotta tell you, I use this meter a lot when I'm photographing flying birds. So if I'm photographing a bird that's out flying, I advance my light meter probably 2/3 of a stop, so that even though you're on a blue sky and your camera's focusing on a point, the sky light pollutes in there, and if you don't advance your light meter, that's when you end up with these dark silhouettes instead of a really exposed image. So that's how I set up the outside of the camera. So let me talk about the settings inside the camera. The first thing that I have set up is that this camera has 2 SD cards in it, and I have it set up so it writes to both SD cards. I have seen zero evidence that it slows down the camera at all. And the reason why I do that is I've had SD cards fail on me, and it's very important that you have your data back up. It's much more important that you have extra SD cards than to be depending on writing all these data to 2 separate cards. So that would be the first thing that I would do. The second thing that I do is I adjust my how many images the camera takes, or how fast the shutter goes. So this camera is capable of taking 20 frames a second. Now I don't have it set up to do that. I have it set up to take about 8 frames a second. So when I push the button down, it just takes about 8 frames a second. And the reason why I do that is that if you have it set for 20 frames a second, it's just way too many images for you to go through, and it can be exponentially just problematic, where you end up with, you take a picture of a bird and the first one's in focus and all the other ones are in focus and they're basically all the same. So that's the reason why I have it set for 8 frames a second. The last setting that I have set up inside the camera is the how it exposes the film. So there's 2 options you have on the first shot. So it will expose for the first shot and keep that exposure settings for the rest of the images, or servo, where it adjusts for every image that you take. And I think it's important that you shoot in servo, especially for bird photography, wildlife photography. It's very, very important. And the very last thing that I want to talk about, and this is probably the most important thing about this, is how many focal points you use. Now I have a button on the back of this camera that allows me to quickly adjust the buttons. I push the button, I select the focal point I want, and then I can start taking pictures. I can do this in less than a second. This is a great way to get those shots that, if you're taking pictures of birds in a bush and all of a sudden you see a bird flying over, you can simply adjust to all the aperture, all the focal points, and then you go up and you try and take a picture of the flying bird. It's really a great tool to have. So these are the settings I use on my photography equipment. I hope this is helpful to you. If it is, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel, because that really helps us in the YouTube world. Become a Patreon supporter. Your support allows us to keep doing this. My name is Sean Lee. I want to thank you for watching.